What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video, and before we get into this one about creating numerical superiority through the midfield third, please like and subscribe the video. That means an awful lot, and it's a huge help, and you guys have been absolutely awesome about that, so please keep it coming. And I just want to recap yesterday because they flow into each other and they should be talked about in the same sentence, and that is when you're creating numerical superiority in your first phase of buildup, which is in your own defensive third. So when you create numerical superiority in your initial buildup, the goal is to progress the ball, and after you do so, a lot of times the defense is able to drop and they form their mid block. So this is a pretty common occurrence. Usually it's pretty rare that teams go from one third to the next third to the next third, all in one continuous forward action without having to reset, restructure themselves. And when you move through the thirds of the field or progress in different phases of your build-up, that it just depends on what you like to call it. Some people like to go on the third, some people talk about it in phases, but whenever you transition from one action, so one zone of buildup to the next, things start to change. And if you're looking to use numerical superiority in your first phase of buildup, then chances are that you'll use it in some sort of form in your second phase, or if not, maybe you look to progress in a different way. But either way, if you're going to use numerical superiority in the midfield third, it probably will look different than how you did it in your initial build-up phase. So what I mean by this is when we move into the midfield third, we essentially lose a player in possession because of the goalkeeper. Now he can come here and act as a reset button, if you will, to then circulate and consolidate possession, but then we move back into our own third and our initial phase rather than our secondary phase. So now we still have the advantage if the team is playing with a +1 at their center back position, which is pretty common, and most teams do that. So that's where we can find our free man advantage. And now in the first line, this is often where we find the free man is exploited. And this is between our 3 players in build-up phase and we have a 3v2 in our first phase, and then our 4 players are matched up, and then we have 3 players pinning their back line. So now one thing that's interesting about this is Pep Guardiola gives a talk about it. You've probably seen it, but if not, I'll just recap the key concept and so we can continue on with this video. So in Pep Guardiola's explanation of numerical superiority, he presents his audience with a team in possession versus a 4-4-2, and he said he explains it as coaches often say pass and move, but they don't give any direction with this, so it's kind of useless information. So you can pass and move as much as you want, but a lot of times you'll be wasting energy and you won't be using these actions with a conscious goal at the end of it. So passing and moving is great, but really you might just have to pass and move a lot less to reach your final goal, which should be scoring a goal or progressing play. So with that being said, he says we could have 3 players in the initial build-up line, 2 midfielders, 2 central midfielders with our wing backs, because we're playing in a 3-4-3 now, and with our front 3. So let's see how this looks. I'm just going to rearrange the pieces slightly, and this is very linear and very square for a shape, and it's just to show the concepts. So from the start, Pep Guardiola presents that 3 players trying to advance against two strikers, it should be as easy as one shifting play, the forward shift, and now they're able to swing the ball and progress, because he presents that with three players, and if needed, your two midfielders, they should be able to work the ball from one player to the next. So if it's even here, he can go to press, or here maybe they use an entry-level pass to play it in. The defense would just naturally narrow towards the ball, and now we're out through the half space. So when we get to this point, I'll reset. We're entering the next line of defense with an extra man on the ball. So when he drives forward, now the defense has to make a decision as they're shifting, and now we have one player free on the ball, and he's our free player, so he's our +1, and the player on the ball driving into the midfield through his dribbling and progression, this is where the man advantage derives from. So now, whether this player jumps to stop the ball, we have a free player here, and if they shift more, he jumps, our free player is now here. And then if they really shift over, let's say they shift over here and he jumps, the free player is here. And if they ultimately all shift over, our free player is here on the weak side. So it's not a question of creating the free player in this situation, but it's a means of accessing them and what concepts we're going to use to take advantage of this numerical superiority, because it is there in this situation, but then different concepts like rotations or interchanges can manipulate the structure to then find the free player and get him closer in a more dangerous space to the ball. So that was just Pep Guardiola's take on it. I think it's interesting and worth taking into consideration, because you can think of numerical superiority as a use of effective pinning of players and defenses, and then finding the free player in an advanced position and trying to create that situation. So that was just that. But a lot of times it's not as cut and dry as a 3-4-3 versus a 4-4-2, and there's a bunch of different ways you can go about it as well. And I see a lot of teams or a lot of coaches talk about, two forwards, so automatically go to 3 in the back, the 8 becomes a holding midfielder, winger narrows, and now we have our three backs, 3 midfielders, and our wide players, and it's a bit of asymmetry with that from one side to the next. But with this, it's pretty generic, and it can get old. And with a 3-2, you commit a lot of guys to the first round of build-up, whereas if you're able to progress the ball against 2 forwards with 2 center backs, then you create the free man further forward, and you don't have to take players away from advanced positions to then create it. But with that being said, we can think of ideas now on how to create numerical advantage and look to jump into the midfield. And one way that Pep Guardiola has done this, he's introduced the concept, so I'll just give a different variation of it, is he's probably introduced everyone to the inverted fullback. Started really in England with Delph, and then before that in Bayern Munich we've seen it. So it's been around a while, and I just want to show a different option. So if we have two forwards, one holds, one cuts off the angle, one cuts off the holding midfielder, and then they can start to press that way or this way. And now this is when the inverted fullback can come into play. So we have 2 center backs with 2 holding midfielders, which I've mentioned in some of my work before, and the inefficiency it can create, but also can become a very efficient source of build-up, because you have these 2 holding midfielders and they can play very adaptive roles. So now usually the team in their defending phase won't commit here because it'll create imbalances, and it's just an unnatural pressing scenario for the wide midfielder. They might jump a little bit and create a staggering, which would be more efficient because they would control the half space a bit more, and they would create better access between the lines. So they would have horizontal positioning to control the space between the lines, and they'd have more vertical access to the players like their holding midfielder. But with that being said, we can reset the defense a little to make the picture really, really clear. So now we have 2 holding midfielders, 2 center backs. So if the center back is able to progress, the 10 on the other team can cut off. And so now the 10 is trying to create positional superiority in the defensive phase, and he is using his cover shadow to do so. But with the inverted fullback, we have the player on the far side who can then receive the ball and go forward. And then from here, when this player drives forward, we can then look at the connections between the lines. So that really depends on how narrow the winger is going to go and the positioning of the 10. And so now this is when it becomes a little bit trickier and requires some quick thinking and critical thinking from your players in possession. So we've just progressed against the 2 forwards via numerical superiority and taking advantage of a vertical pass, or a diagonal pass, into our inverted fullback, and then inverted fullback took advantage of the space from the half spaces into the central corridor and questioned the pressing or defensive dynamics of the defensive team. And now from here, they'll have to make a decision whether this player goes, then where does the space begin? The space arrives between the 2 holding midfielders, and then we can essentially look at ways to pin these players. So it can be via an 8 and an inverted winger to then create an effective pinning situation. And then we have our 8 in the half space. So we're essentially overloading the half space and the central corridor to try and pin the back 4 to create space for the false 9 to then come and turn. So that's just one situation that you could do. But if that's not the player, they have jump and press. Maybe you have this player. So then again, we could have our, if this player isn't accessible via a diagonal passing option, we can then have our winger drop this player here, and if he comes to press, then the wide area is open to progress. So it's really about finding how the defense shifts, creating players in certain situations to then take advantage of the imbalances you can find from the defense. And it does take players that can really think on the fly of if the defense presents A, then you go with option B, or some sort of game theory. I know that's a big comparison, a metaphor that often is used with the game. But so this is just one situation. I just wanted to make a quick video for today, and I'll come out with a bit longer video. But pretty much the big takeaway is when you come from your first third of build-up and you move into the second third, if you want to take advantage of numerical superiority, you lose a man because of your goalkeeper. So now your structure will probably have to change using rotations of some sort to create different number balances among your offensive team compared to the defensive team. So I'll just highlight the big shift from the 2 teams. So the team goes with a flatter 4-4-2, and whereas in the first video they went with a 4-2-2-2. So that was one structure change, because as many times offense and defense, the concepts are pretty similar, not always the same but similar. And so then we changed from, it just naturally changes because we lost a player in our first line of build-up. So instead of a 3-man initial phase build-up, we go with a 2. We have an inverted fullback, so now instead of a single pivot, we have a double pivot. And then now with our players in the wide area, let's do a little asymmetry now. We have a fullback, and we can put him in the midfield line, and then now we create players in the midfield line and then 2 asymmetric forwards. So that's pretty much the structure, and it does change, but just wanted to highlight the 2 structures of the teams to show the results of rotations and whatnot. So that's today's video. I hope you got something out of it, and please again subscribe and like the video as always. Thank you so much. See you in the next one.